People in the village don't talk about the school anymore, and when they do, their voices drop without them realizing it. The building still stands at the edge of the fields, paint peeling, windows black like burned eyes, as if it never stopped watching. What most outsiders don't know is that this school was never officially closed. It simply emptied itself one night, and no one ever went back. If you're listening to this on Unblinking, I want you to picture a place where children once laughed, where bells rang every morning, and where silence now feels heavier than sound. Because this story doesn't start with screams or shadows. It starts with something much worse. It starts with a normal school day that never ended. Back then, the village was small but lively, surrounded by crops and dirt roads that disappeared into fog every winter morning. The school sat just beyond the last row of houses, close enough for parents to watch their children walk in, far enough that the teachers stayed late without noticing how dark it got. It had 6 classrooms, 1 staff room, and a hallway that echoed even when empty. The children called it old but safe, and the teachers called it forgotten but manageable. There were rumors, of course, like any rural place has, about noises at night or lights turning on by themselves. Most people laughed them off because nothing truly bad had ever happened there. At least, not yet. Everything changed during the final semester when students started saying they heard footsteps after the last bell rang. At first, teachers blamed the kids for playing pranks or sneaking around. But the complaints kept coming. Always the same description. Slow steps, pacing the hallway, stopping outside classrooms where no one was inside. One teacher, Mr. Hale, stayed late to check the noise himself. He walked the halls alone, lights buzzing above him, doors locked and silent. He said later that the footsteps stopped the moment he listened for them. What he didn't mention until weeks later was that he felt watched the entire time. Within days, students began refusing to sit in certain desks. They said those desks felt cold even in summer, and that papers would slide off them on their own. One girl swore she felt someone breathing behind her neck during a test. When the teacher turned around, no one was there. By the time parents noticed changes, it was already too late. Kids came home exhausted, quiet, and afraid to sleep. Some woke up screaming about bells ringing in the dark. Others talked about a man standing in the hallway who never moved his face, only his eyes. If you enjoy these kinds of true-style horror stories and don't want to miss what happens next, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Unblinking. It helps the channel grow, and it tells me you want more stories like this. Trust me, you'll want to stay for the rest. The school staff tried to ignore the fear, but the building itself seemed to react. Doors that had always stuck began opening smoothly on their own. Chalk writings appeared overnight, erased by morning, leaving only dust shaped like words no one remembered writing. The janitor quit after saying he heard children laughing in empty classrooms at dawn. The worst incident happened on a foggy Thursday, when the bell rang after everyone had already left. A nearby farmer heard it echoing across the fields long after sunset. He said it rang once, paused, then rang again, slower the second time. No one could explain how the bell still had power. The next morning, the principal unlocked the doors and found muddy footprints lining the hallway. They were small, like children's shoes, but there were too many. They stopped abruptly in front of classroom 3, the one students had avoided 4 weeks. Inside, every desk faced the back wall. No one ever admitted to moving them. From that day on, teachers stopped staying late, and students rushed out the moment the bell rang. The building felt tighter, like the air itself didn't want people inside anymore. Windows fogged even on clear days, and the hallway clock began losing time, always slowing near the final period. Then came the day when the attendance sheet didn't make sense. A name appeared on the list that didn't belong to any current student. It was written neatly, in ink, as if it had always been there. When the teacher asked about it, the room went silent. One boy finally whispered that the name belonged to a student who died years ago. The teacher laughed nervously and moved on, but the name stayed on the sheet. It appeared again the next day, and the next, always marked present. No one crossed it out. No one knew how. That afternoon, a child didn't come home. The missing child was found just before sunset, standing alone in the schoolyard. Shoes muddy and eyes unfocused. He didn't cry when his parents reached him, and he didn't speak on the way home. When asked where he had been, he only said he was waiting for the bell to ring again. That was the last full sentence anyone ever heard him say. After that incident, Fear spread through the village faster than any rumor before it. Parents demanded answers, teachers blamed stress, and the principal insisted everything was under control. Yet every night, lights were seen flickering inside the school. Even after the power was officially shut off, the building refused to feel empty. Classes continued, but attendance dropped by the day. Students complained of headaches the moment they stepped inside, as if the walls themselves were pressing inward. Some said the hallway felt longer than before, like it stretched while they walked. Others swore the doors shifted places when no one was looking. One afternoon, a substitute teacher named Mrs. Carter arrived early and waited alone in the staff room. She later said she heard chairs scraping in the classrooms, slow and deliberate. When she checked, the rooms were empty, but every chair was pulled halfway out. She never returned after that day. The school records began showing errors no one could explain. Old files appeared in locked cabinets, listing students who had transferred decades ago. Their photos were faded, faces blurred, eyes darkened by age and dust. Some teachers recognized names their grandparents once mentioned. The janitor, who had already planned to quit, stayed one last night to clean classroom 3. He said the room smelled damp, like earth after rain, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. As he swept, he noticed writing slowly appearing on the blackboard behind him. It spelled out a single word before the lights went out. Present? The janitor ran without locking the door. From that night on, the bell began ringing at random hours. Sometimes it rang once, sometimes twice, sometimes not at all when classes ended. Students learned to leave without waiting for it. Teachers stopped correcting mistakes on the attendance sheet, afraid of what names might appear. During a routine fire drill, students were lined up outside when someone noticed movement in the second-floor window. A group of children stood there, watching silently. The problem was that no one had been left inside. When the teacher counted heads, everyone was accounted for. The principal finally agreed to close the school for a full inspection. Officials arrived, walked the halls, and found nothing structurally wrong. They said the building was old, but safe. Still, none of them stayed longer than an hour. On the final day before closure, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Rain hammered the roof, and thunder shook the windows. The power went out halfway through the afternoon, leaving the halls dim and quiet. Students were dismissed early, but one classroom didn't empty. Classroom 3 remained occupied. A teacher passing by saw figures sitting at the desks, heads bowed, hands folded neatly. She called out, thinking students had been forgotten. When the lightning flashed, the room was empty again. The desks were facing the back wall. That night, the village gathered near the school as the storm continued. The bell rang louder than ever, echoing across the fields, ringing until the sound cracked. Lights flared in every window at once. Then everything went dark. By morning, the school doors were wide open. Inside, muddy footprints covered the floors again, overlapping, layered, as if dozens of children had marched through. The attendance sheet lay on the principal's desk, soaked and wrinkled. Every name on it was marked present, including the teachers. If you're watching this on Unblinking and still with me, you already know this isn't just a haunted building. Something in that school was keeping records. And it wasn't done yet, because the village thought closing the school would end it. They were wrong. The village elders decided silence was safer than truth. They told everyone the school would be demolished. Life would return to normal. But weeks passed, and the building still stood untouched, locked behind rusted chains. No construction crew ever accepted the job. People began noticing changes at night. Dogs refused to walk near the school road and pulled against their leashes, whining. Phone signals dropped completely within 50 feet of the gate. Even the air felt heavier there, thick enough to slow your breathing. A young man named Daniel, who had grown up in the village and recently returned, didn't believe the stories. He said, fear always makes people imagine things. Wanting proof, he brought a camera and recorded himself approaching the school after midnight. That footage would later circulate quietly among villagers, never shared online. Inside the school, Daniel whispered jokes to calm himself. The halls looked smaller than he remembered, the ceiling lower, the walls closer together. His footsteps echoed too loudly, as if someone else was walking just behind him. When it turned, the hallway was empty. As he reached classroom 3, his camera battery drained instantly. The room was colder than the rest of the building, and the smell of damp earth returned. The blackboard still showed faint chalk marks, though no one had ridden there in weeks. Daniel heard breathing that wasn't his own. The bell rang once. Not from above, but from inside the classroom. The door slammed shut behind him, and the lights flickered weakly. Desks scraped across the floor, rearranging themselves in slow, careful movements. Daniel screamed for help, but his voice sounded distant, like it was being swallowed by the walls. When the door opened again, the classroom was empty. Daniel never came home. The village searched for days, but there were no tracks leading away from the school. Only one muddy footprint was found inside classroom 3, pressed deep into the floor. It didn't match Daniel's shoe size. It matched no one's. After that, the elders finally spoke to a local historian. He revealed something the village had buried decades ago. The school was built over land once used as a temporary shelter during a deadly outbreak, long before modern medicine arrived. Children were quarantined there, separated from their families. Records showed that many never left. When supplies ran out and panic took over, the doors were locked to prevent spread. The bell was used to signal meals, roll calls, and emergencies. On the final night, the bell rang continuously as the sick begged to be released. No one came. The building was sealed, not cleansed. When the outbreak ended, the shelter was quietly repurposed into a school. New paint covered old walls, desks replaced beds, and time erased guilt. But memory doesn't disappear that easily. Especially not where children were taught to wait. That explained the attendance sheets, the bell, the watching figures. The school wasn't haunting the village. It was continuing its routine. And now, it had added new names. One night, every radio in the village turned on at the same time. Static filled the air. 10 children's voices, counting numbers slowly. Parents recognized their kids' voices, mixed with others long gone. The counting ended with the sound of a bell. The school lights turned on again, and the school was listening. The village elders gathered before sunrise, knowing delay would only make things worse. Radios were smashed, phones turned off, and families were told to stay inside no matter what they heard. No one argued anymore. Everyone understood the school was no longer reacting, it was preparing. At exactly 7:30 a.m., the bell rang again. It rang with the same rhythm used decades ago for morning attendance. Even people miles away felt it vibrate in their chests. Some swore they heard their names spoken between the chimes. Against every warning, Daniel's younger sister slipped out of her house and followed the sound. She said later that the bell didn't feel frightening to her. It felt familiar, like something calling her back where she belonged. By the time anyone noticed she was gone, the school doors were already open. Inside, the halls were brighter than they had ever been. Sunlight poured through windows that had been broken for years, now perfectly intact. Children filled the classrooms, sitting silently, faces calm and patient. Some wore old clothing, others wore modern uniforms. Daniel sat at a desk in classroom 3. His eyes were open, but he didn't react when his sister screamed his name. The blackboard behind him was filled with dates, stretching backward and forward in time. At the bottom was today's date, underlined twice. The bell rang again. The elders arrived too late to stop what happened next. They heard chanting, low and steady, echoing through the halls. The school doors slammed shut on their own. Dust rose from the ground as if the building itself had taken a breath. The historian realized the truth too late. The school didn't want revenge. It wanted continuation. It needed living voices to replace the ones that had faded. The elders made a decision that would never be written down. They cut the power to the entire village. Fires were lit, engines started, and every road leading toward the school was blocked. They rang no bells. They spoke no names. Inside the building, the chanting slowed. Children began to look around, confused. Some faded where they sat, like smoke losing shape. The lights dimmed, one classroom at a time. The final bell rang weakly, then stopped. By morning, the school was empty again. Windows shattered outward, doors hung open. Classroom 3 was silent, except for one desk left, slightly pulled back. Daniel was gone, and so were many of the figures. The village never rebuilt the school. They tore it down stone by stone and buried the remains far from where children walk. No building was ever allowed on that land again. Parents taught their kids never to answer bells. They didn't hear with their own ears. Even now, Sometimes at dawn, the wind carries a faint ringing sound. People pause, listening, afraid to move. Attendance is still being taken somewhere. If you made it this far on Unblinking, comment below and tell me one thing you noticed that others might have missed. Share this story with someone who still remembers their school bell too clearly. And subscribe, because some places never stop counting who's present.